Well, we are back with this week's session of Goaldigger here live on LinkedIn. And it is a beautiful day here in New York City. And we were just catching up, Debbie and I, and you'll learn a lot more about Debbie in a second, about the fact that it has literally been almost 2 years to the day that New York, at least, shut down. And we saw a mass exodus of employees that didn't come back to their offices for almost 2 years, people leaving the city, people figuring out how to work from home, work remotely, companies having to figure that out. But I am super excited because we got to know Debbie over the last 2 years, Silver Linings, who is Senior Vice President of Marketing, Communications, and Culture at Velocity at Paramount, formerly known as Viacom CBS. So welcome, Debbie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
It's so good to have you because the first time, and I'll give a little shout out to Chris Ficara,
Yes.
Chris at Paramount, who I've known since childhood, actually, introduced Debbie and I. And I think that first Zoom, we just hit it off, just thinking about people and culture and leadership and what we need to do to invest, in particular, our women and our women of color. But we're going to get to that. But let's kind of go back, because Goaldigger is always about the leaders that we have on the show, about their voice, how they found their voice, now how they're using their voice. So, Debbie, let's walk us back a little bit and tell us a bit about your story to how you got to where you're at today at Paramount.
Sure. So I went to University of Virginia undergrad. I'm a Jersey girl, grew up in Jersey, and then went to went to school at Virginia. And while I was there, I would say I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I ended up getting an economics degree and didn't know what I wanted to do, where I wanted to work, but I did know that I wanted to work in sports. So that was like the thing that was what I wanted to get into. And back then, I will date myself, you had to go through the newspaper and mail your resumes for jobs. And so I ended up working at a software and hardware reseller for 4 years. And that, I wasn't really interested in that area, but it was an amazing opportunity for me. When I first started, the average age was probably like 25 years old. And so we had a great time going into work every day. I still have some of my lifelong 20-year friends from that time. And I became a manager there very young. So again, it was really great opportunity. And so I always try and look at like everything that's in front of me of like, what can I get out of it and what can I learn from it? And so I look back at that time at SHI and say like, that was a really pivotal growth time where I was able to meet great friends, that part, but also like develop management skills and all that good stuff while there. And so I knew that, again, I wanted to be in sports. So I ended up going back full time to Seton Hall to get an MBA in sport management and marketing. And then so at the time, I think there were only like maybe 8 schools or something that had MBAs in sport management. Now there's many more. And while I was there, I realized I could add a marketing double concentration pretty easily. So between my first and second years, I applied and just got an internship at the NFL, which was super fortunate. And so ended up there and then just kept in touch. I graduated without a job, but kept in touch with my NFL contacts and ended up going back there as a temp employee when my boss, who was my boss the whole time, shout out to Jamie Weston, an amazing leader, she was going out on maternity leave. And I came in temporary and stayed for 11 and a half years. And so that time was really where I feel like I say that I grew up in marketing there. Like I learned really, how to deal with people and the discipline, of course. And one thing I will say about working at the NFL is like, you learn your stuff. Everybody is prepared. There's always a why. Nothing is just like that. There's always a reason for it. And so I really learned a lot of job skills while I was there and like professional development while I was there. And then there came a time when I felt like I needed to move on from there. And I was really looking for a culture fit. That was the biggest thing for me. And so I was fortunate to find this role at what was Viacom at the time, working for the Nickelodeon team. And that was to be the VP of Strategic Planning and Operations for Nickelodeon Velocity, which was the Nickelodeon branded content team. And 6 weeks after I started, we merged with the rest of the Velocity team who did the rest of the branded content, integrated marketing for the rest of Viacom. So went through that transition. And then, if people believe in coincidences, the day we were announcing the reorg for Velocity was the day the Viacom and CBS merger got announced. So then we went through that transition, and now almost 2 years later, or a year and a half later, now we're Paramount. But I've had 3 different roles here, but excuse me, all getting to this place where now I oversee comms, which internal and external comms, and then culture, which we say as DEI, learning development, our hiring, and also kind of our social interaction for the team.
And that's how we got to know each other.
So
we're going to go back because I have so many questions. So I didn't know you were a Cavalier.
I am a Cavalier. Go Who's.
I'm a Terp.
Okay.
And back in the day, we were not friends because Maryland was still in the ACC. So, wow, we're in the Big Ten, but I don't like that. But anyway, I digress. But we respected you. You weren't Duke. So
that's right.
So, okay. So you want to go into sports, you get out of school and you go into tech basically, right?
Yeah.
So, but you learn a lot, couple of years. I started my career in tech and a startup, and you really learn, you get great friends, you get a lot of responsibility, people management. Like, people downplay that when you work for a company like that. There's so much learning opportunity there. Exactly. But I would assume it was a lot of guys.
It actually was women owned, and still to this day. And I believe it is, don't quote me, but I believe it's the largest women owned, minority owned company in America. So it's definitely grown. But back then it was 10 years old. I think that was when we had my first year. I think there was the 10-year anniversary. So it was pretty well split.
It's interesting because back then,
yes,
I wasn't even probably thinking that way when in the late 90s, when I graduated, like, woman owned.
Right.
I just wanted the job, right? Wow. So
one of the amazing points that I remember now is we used to see the owner of the company in the bathroom, right? And she would know everybody's name. Now it's obviously way too big for that now, but that's something that I still take away of, like, the accessibility and of, as a leader, of feeling like people and people know you, right? Yeah. Which is important.
So important, right? We had a panel last night or a fireside chat last night at Luminary, and that was something that we talked about, right? That accessibility, that human-centric approach versus I'm sitting up here and I don't talk to anyone below other than my management team. Okay, so you go there, then you go back to school, you get this incredible opportunity to intern at the NFL. So awesome. I'm a sports fanatic, so wow. You stayed there for 11 years.
Yeah.
And you talk about culture fit, right? So what was it at the NFL during those years, which are really, I would say, critical learning years and development as a manager and a leader that obviously led you to the next step? What was it that really encouraged you to stay? Was it the opportunity? Was it the management? Was it everything?
Yeah, well, I would say, when I first started, the first couple of years, I would always say, like, I'm so happy that when I go into work, I'm talking about the Jets and the Giants and not stocks and bonds, right? Like, so there was always that part, which was my dream was always to work in sports. And, I was working in sports marketing, and that's what I loved. And so, and when you just think about the awesome things you get to work on, we did the decor for Super Bowl and worked on team rebrands and with Nike and all that good stuff. So the job itself, is amazing. I would say it is a culture where you're always on, everybody's always connected. And so you travel a lot. And so, in the beginning, I loved traveling a lot. Probably
Right.
by the end, I was like, I want
Yeah.
to be home a little bit,
Right.
So I think there's the evolution. I started there when I was almost 30.
Okay.
And so I would say throughout my 30s, it was a lot of traveling and being away. And as I approached 40, I kind of was like, this life, I know I have to get out of this industry or out of this world in order to live a different life that I wanted to live. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the transition that happened. And as I looked at myself and what I wanted for my life, it was like that's where the culture became the biggest part to me, almost more than the job, of where I went on the next step.
So you kind of grow up, as you said, in marketing at the NFL. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think also there's a whole generation now that thinks that's a long time in a company. I could never imagine myself staying in a company that long, but you had unique opportunities. You probably had some great managers that were sponsors and mentors, but you grew up in marketing. Can you kind of elaborate?
Sure. So I would say, so again, I mentioned Jamie, who was my manager the entire time I was there. And then also, so she was probably the director of brand marketing when I started and ended up as an SVP before she left. And so she and then Shandon Melvin, who was our creative director, I would say the three of us were a really kind of tight knit group that worked through that full time. Right. So part of that was the people, right? Feeling like I was working with great people. Part of it was feeling like I was always learning. And again, Jamie's support of always feeling like there was opportunity, of feeling like, we had a great relationship where if there was something that I was thinking about that I wanted to do, I went to her at one point and said, I want to learn more about advertising. She allowed me to work on the advertising. I want to be more on the strategy side. And I find what I say to people is, definitely be vocal and speak up, because even if people can't do something about that right then, they'll keep it back here in the back of their mind. So if you don't say it, then they have no idea that you're interested in it.
Right.
So I would say the opportunity for growth and feeling like I was continuing to learn, continuing to get more exposure. We had a CMO come in, Dawn Hudson, who's amazing. She was from Pepsi. And she, again, the support and just feeling like there was opportunity, I would say that was the key of what kept me there so long.
Right. And that creates, and we've talked about this just within the world at Paramount, this loyalty. You want to, you don't just want to retain employees for the sake of retaining. You want to retain them, then you want them to be excited about the organization. You want them to work really hard.
Yeah.
So clearly Jamie and others were saying, you're learning, you're growing, you're adding tremendous amount of value. You keep getting more. And then at that time when you're saying, how did you know it was time to make a move?
Yeah, I think that I just felt like, it's funny because I just felt like I knew when I knew, it was like this life, this environment, everything that goes along with this. It's a hardcore culture, right? And it's like all of this, I just knew that like I was ready for something different, and that I remember specifically one day where I just felt like I was so tired from my work week that I couldn't do what I wanted to do in my personal life. And like that was the light bulb where I was like, this is not the life that I want to live for myself at this age. And so that was when, the first seed of like, it might be time to move on here. And felt like I needed to look at the options and keep the options open.
I think, being as my banking life, right? 15 years I was on the road, right? You're a road warrior.
Yes.
And, people would always say to me, Debbie, they'd go, oh, it's so exciting. I'm like, well, it's so exciting. And, for the first couple of years, then you don't even remember what hotel you're waking up in.
Exactly. I mean, it's like when I would go, I just told this story. I would go to check out like at the cafe or something, and somebody would be like, what's your room number? And I couldn't even remember my room number. And I'd be like, oh, that's last week's room number, like
what? For me, I knew it was like, wow, when the flight attendants
exactly
Airways like knew me, they'd be like, hello, like, Oh no, I've talked to this flight attendant more than I've talked to my friends these past couple of weeks. Not
Like, that's
good,
a problem.
right?
Yes.
I actually had a flight attendant once from it was a Hong Kong flight back to London, tuck me in.
Take care of you. That's very nice.
I was like, okay, this is not good. So those are a couple of light bulbs. So okay, so you know you're going to make a change. How one of the things we hear right now, particularly with the Great Resignation and sort of all of the things that have happened over the last couple of years to women, how did you set? Number one, how did you think about as you were looking beyond the world of the NFL? And you talk about culture, there's kind of two questions. One, how did you define that, that cultural fit? And two, how did you leave?
Yeah. So I would say what was really helpful to me was just looking at job descriptions out there. And I knew that the job that I had was a little bit unique in that because we had worked together so long, it kind of just evolved in itself. Like my title said brand, but I didn't do a whole lot of like day-to-day brand work. It was more strategy and should we do this and should we partner with this? And so as I was looking for jobs, I needed to figure out then what does that mean for my next job if I don't have a traditional day-to-day that's not going to fit into a box that is like, you want to be a VP of brand marketing,
Right.
And so I looked through a ton of different job postings, and that's how I kind of started to figure out what my next step was going to be. And I knew I didn't just want to like go do what I was doing again somewhere else.
Right.
So it was very eye-opening and just an exercise for me to just kind of see what's out there in the world. And I was very fortunate to find when I saw this role, it was actually the first one that I saw where I was like, oh, this looks really interesting. Let me do this. I'm fortunate to get through that process. So that is not a fast process, right? When you're going in that way, then you have to just kind of walk through all of it. And then I also feel like I don't believe anybody gets a job by just applying. So it's the real, like, are you finding that connection? Do you know somebody at that company?
Yep.
And that's ultimately what happened was that I had applied for it. I found somebody on LinkedIn who knew somebody, and he ended up passing on my resume. And I really, truly tell people, like, you have to have somebody put in a word for you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a pile of, going through a system. It's not even a pile. It's just
tons and tons of emails.
Yes, exactly. And so my interview process actually was relatively short because they were kind of near the end of their process. So I was able to kind of speed through that. And again, because of the great relationship that I had, I was able to actually talk to Jamie through the process. And so when I ended up leaving, she knew that it was coming,
Right.
And so that's really dependent on a relationship that anybody has with their manager. But it was much more of a shock to other people because people felt like, they felt like I was a lifer at the NFL, after all that time. And because of the role that I had, I spoke to a lot of people, across the org, up and down.
Sure.
So, I think that was a bit of a surprise, but it was not a surprise to my manager as we went through that process.
And that's the most important person, right? Especially you'd been with her for so long, having that. And, we talk so much at Luminary and certainly with the women that we work with at Paramount around having good manager dialogue, right?
Yes.
Whether it's your family situation, your personal, professional, right? If they're your manager for a year, if they're your manager for 10 years, right? It's having that. And then I think in my mind, a good manager, a good leader, when someone in this case, like you going and saying, I have this opportunity, I can only imagine she was like, this is amazing, right? We'd love to keep you, but you have to take this.
Yeah. And I think the same thing as we're going now through the Great Resignation of, I had somebody leave my team maybe 2 months ago. And I was like, that's great. The fact that, and she was actually only on my team for a few months, but that transition, and then she was going into the area that was on the team. And I'm like, I look at that as a success because that means that she worked on something that she enjoyed and she found an outlet to do that. And that's great. We should be supportive of people always, going to the best thing that's for them. And 100%, want to make sure that people find and are doing what they really want to do.
Yeah, we focus, I think, and most managers focus on, is an employee a good leaver? Yes. But there's also, are you providing a good exit?
Yes, right.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so now you're at Viacom.
Right.
Merger happens. I mean, you over the last couple of years have really had to deal with a ton of transition, had to also build up your own, personal social equity within the company.
Yep.
And really going through multiple transitions, having to be this leader, exacerbated obviously over the last 2 years. So how did you find that this was my voice in the NFL? Here's now my voice within this new company, this new role, and then obviously over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because it's something that I thought about a lot as I transitioned, because I had been there at the NFL for so long. I knew everybody to call. It was so easy to do this. Everybody knew to come for this, and now you're in a situation. I almost felt like I did a disservice to myself because I didn't know how to be the new girl anymore. So I think part of that is just being your authentic self. So there's that part, so that people, really get to know you and understand. And it just takes time, right? Like off the bat, people won't know what you're bringing to the table. And so you have to give yourself the grace to kind of go through that process and just make sure that you're doing things well. And that's how people will build, their opinion of you. And so that happened, yes, when we went to Nick. And then again, when we merged into the larger team, again, was that process with this whole group of new people. And what I would say in the past 2 years that's really helped that is the focus on DEI and multicultural marketing and all of that through, after the murder of George Floyd, that certainly became a priority. And as we transitioned in September of 2019 to our new team, comms and culture inclusive of DEI became part of my role. And so way back in February of 2020, Dario Spina, who's the head of our team, our CMO for Velocity, wanted to pull together a multicultural marketing capability for us to take to the market, right? To say that we are experts in this. We knew we had work to do on it. And so we set it up as a year-long project. And what ended up happening was, because we had already been working on that when everything happened with George Floyd, we had a framework that we could quickly pull together and activate against. And that became something that became very visible and very much a stake in the ground of like, this is who we are. This is the team that we're going to be. Dario very quickly said, we're going to build an anti-racist culture on this team. And I was the driver behind that, right? So through a lot of that work, I feel like I was able to build up those things that, maybe took, more years at the NFL.
Yes.
Also, because I started at a more junior level there, right? And had to work all the way up. That everything that's happened over the past 2 years has kind of accelerated that process from visibility. And again, Dario's been an amazing leader of really saying, this is who we're going to be, and we're going to do what we need to do. And that also is for professional development opportunities for people, making sure people's voices are heard, and building out the culture that we really want to have where people feel like they belong.
Yeah, I coming from the banking world and then starting Luminary, I didn't really have a lot of exposure to companies like yours. And so I didn't know what to expect really when we started working. One of the things that I've seen is just this, yes, from Dario, he's an incredible leader, and you and others, but there's a lot of people that may leave and they come back.
Yeah. Well, I think that, first of all, I hear that this is a thing that's coming up in the Great Resignation. I've just started reading about these articles of like, the people that are left, and this is now. But I think that when you build a place, and this is where it goes back to your point about how you leave, that feeling of leaving, of like when you build up a place where the culture is very strong and that people feel like they're heard, then, it's something that people miss when they go somewhere else and they don't find it, right? Yeah. And I think it's relatively unique, right? Because many places don't have a culture that you want to stay in. They may have money, they may have opportunity, they may have these things, And so if we can pull all of that together and do great work in a great culture, then, that's certainly what we're striving for.
So when you left the NFL and joined this, and again, a large company, and you were looking for that culture, it seems really like you found it and you're thriving in that culture, and you're able to not just do your job, really use your voice to have a ton of impact.
Yeah. And, I've kind of recently gone through this process within myself where, as I said before, I always wanted to work in sports. I loved working in sports. And being at the NFL, I felt like, okay, I've lived my dream. Now what? Right. And now I feel like, especially over the past 2 years, I've gone through this transition for myself where it's really what I want to do is impact people and give opportunities, particularly to people of color and to women. And so that's the key driver. Like it's almost like that can be done in many different places. So it's not about the industry. It's not something external. It's like, this is what I can do to impact people, give people resources, give them opportunities, and make them feel like they're heard and that they're growing. And that's the important part to me now in the role that I do day to day.
Well, I can vouch for that, because every single conversation, email we've ever had, that is at the core of what you do, which is, I think, pretty remarkable. There's a question that came in about being a woman of color.
Mm-hmm.
This woman's definitely more junior in her journey. How does she start to find her voice sitting at the table when she feels like the only one?
Yeah, I think part of it is knowing within yourself that you deserve to be there and you have that voice and you want to speak up. And if you can't speak up in that situation, you can either find another situation where you can, right? Or you can work to, just make sure that you're heard within that, right? Because I don't ever want anybody to be in a situation where you feel like you can't be heard. And that's challenging, right? And that goes back to the culture and all of those pieces. And so I always say, like, what I do is not for me because I'm at a level where I can, speak up and say things, right? But for people after me, if they can feel more comfortable, if they can feel more self-confidence and have more of their voice, that's what I'm trying to do. And so make sure that I really want people to feel like you have that voice, right? Use it, and if there are places or skills that you need to develop, do that, seek that out as well to round yourself and really look at everything as an opportunity, and how are you going to get the most of this opportunity, regardless of how it came to you. Make sure that you're leveraging it to get to the next level.
Totally great. I have many more questions. We're right at time, but I have one more question that came in that I want to ask, because I always want to make sure the audience gets an opportunity. This person is looking for her next role. Is asking about what is the thing that you looked for when you were looking for a culture fit?
Yeah, I think for me, it was the idea that you didn't have to always be connected. I used to say to people, they would always answer their emails. Everybody was also doing, and I'd say, you know what? They're going to play on Sunday if you don't answer that email. Yeah. So that type of culture where, like, I don't want anybody working 24 hours a day. I don't want, when you take a break, I believe in vacation and self-care and all that good stuff. And I feel like you have to model that for your team. And so because I want them to do that, I make sure that I do those things as well. And that people can be separated from work because you have to be. You can't work 24 hours a day. It's just not healthy, And so that, not the term work-life balance necessarily, but, just figuring out what works for you and putting boundaries around that, and that being okay.
I love that. The role model leadership. We need more of that, right? Yeah. Debbie, I honestly, now that you guys are coming back into the office after 2 years, I cannot wait to meet you in person.
Yes, we'll do that for sure. We'll get that on the calendar.
Exactly. But thank you so much for joining Goaldigger. Love all of your lessons. Love the journey of your career and how you found your voice. And just thank you again for doing what you're doing. It's wonderful to be a part of it and to be a partner, and to have a great weekend. It looks like it's going to be beautiful.
Yes, I'll take it. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, everyone. Tune in next week for Goaldigger right here on LinkedIn Live.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.